Well, good morning to each one. I too want to welcome you here, and I'm going to continue the greeting of most people so far and say, Happy Father's Day. Father's Day. When Harvey texted me and wanted to know if I would preach, I checked my calendar and realized it was Father's Day. And suddenly the question became, do I speak to the fathers? I think I sort of walked into this one. I think it was the Sunday before he asked me. After church, I was in a discussion, which included Harvey and Wendell and some others after church, and we were talking about various things, and we eventually ended up on parenting. It talked about some people were talking about their teenagers and things like that. And I was well caffeinated that morning. And caffeine has a way of loosening my tongue. And in the middle of it, I realized I was saying lots of things about things I knew nothing about. Harvey made the comment. I sort of made a disclaimer like, yeah, the younger you are, the more you have to say. And then the older you get, the less you do. And Harvey made a comment about like, well, I guess we need the young people, or you need the young guys to tell us how to parent. Anyway, I have a sneaking suspicion that Harvey climbed in his vehicle after church and turned to Arlene and said, I know, I'm going to ask. So here I am. I am going to speak to the fathers. I should say I'm going to speak to a father. And that father's me. This is something I have a lot of trepidation about. Parenting, I've noticed that, like I said a little bit earlier, that it seems like the longer people parent, the less they have to say. And it is something that is very obvious to the rest of us at times, whether or not you are doing well with it. And I think that is some of the trepidation that we face when we talk and address this subject of parenting. I also know that the things I have spoken the most strongly about always come back to get me, and I realize that most likely in 10 years, if I listen to what I said this morning, I will probably cringe at times and say I had no idea what I was talking about. But I am in the thick of it. I am a father. I have 4 small children. And while I do not know what I am doing, I have to figure it out. That's where I'm at. And so I don't have a well-rounded sermon this morning on how to be a father. But instead, I'm just going to share with you some of the questions and the conclusions and the lessons that I'm learning as a father. And I can speak to that because that's what I know. If I was speaking to you about raising teenagers, you should probably go home. But I trust that this can be a blessing and an encouragement. So the title of my message is Lessons, Questions, and Conclusions of a Young Father. The first question that I face is, what does it mean to be a leader of my family? The Bible is very clear on the structure of leadership, of headship in our families, in our churches, and things like that. And it's very clear that the husband is to be the leader of his home. And this begins with marriage. I was talking with someone this week about, we were talking about getting married and honeymoon and all that stuff and how young you are and what happens and stuff like that. And me and this other guy both brought up the the remembrance of the time after you're married. Like you're married, the big day's over, and suddenly it hits you what you've done. And it's like, wow, I am now responsible for another person. I have to provide, I have to care for, and I have to lead. And I can remember as clear as day that moment when it happened to me. When you introduce children into the picture, it takes on a whole new dimension. When you get married, it's at least an adult, most times, or you hope so, I should say. At least they act like, at least maturity-wise. But when you have this child, they are so utterly dependent upon you, and you, as a parent, are going to be the most influential person in shaping who they are, what they believe, and how they face life. No husband or father gets a pass on this. This is a given. This is a responsibility that I accepted. I probably didn't realize it, but I accepted when I said I do. I accept the responsibility to lead my wife. And at that point, too, I also think I was accepting the responsibility of being a father. I was creating the environment that the potential was there for me to be a dad. So as a leader of my home, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a leader? The first thing I want to think, I think about a lot, and I've been working through a lot of lately, is a leader's responsibility is to provide direction. That means that that is my responsibility to frequently evaluate where my family is, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. This is something this is not a one-time thing that I sit down and I write out and I'm set for the rest of my life. But this is a consistent responsibility of me to provide direction for my family. We live in a day where things are very easy. Everything's done with a smartphone, and sometimes it would be nice to be a little bit of a GPS dad. You put in your destination, and it says in 500 feet, turn right. And but that's not how it is. That's not how it is parenting. That's not what it is to be a dad. I am responsible to chart the course for my family. And that begins with, what is the goal? What is the goal for my family? Obviously, I want them to be healthy. I want them to be well-adjusted, socially adept. There's all these things. But ultimately, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, my ultimate goal is for my children to be like Jesus. That's my job. That's my goal. And so my responsibility, say, where am I at? Are we on the right track? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And to continually evaluate with that goal in mind. Am I on track? Are things going in that direction? And I'm not on my own. I'm not on my own with this. I thankfully have someone to help me, and that's my wife. But it is my responsibility to initiate and to create the space for this discussion. Her input is very, very important. Leadership, me leading my home, is not her saying, or not me saying, we need direction for my family. I'm going to go off in the woods, and when I come back, I'm going to have it figured out, and we're going to do it. There are times I go to the woods to figure stuff out, but generally it's to come back. But I need to bring Amy into that as part of leadership, and saying, where do we want to go? What do you see? And then provide a way forward and a way to get there. The second thing of being a leader, and this is something that I've also am learning, is the aspect of ownership. And that is, I am 100% responsible. As the leader of my home, I am 100% responsible for everything that happens in my family. When I'm faced with a difficulty, a problem, it's not my wife's problem. She may be contributing to it. It's not my children's problem. They definitely contribute to it. It's not the church's problem. It's my problem. It's my responsibility. And as a leader, You accept that responsibility. It is your responsibility to lead out and to take that responsibility. In Hebrews 13, it talks about leaders giving account for those they care for, and like what the responsibility of the cared for is to their leaders. It says, hey, make it easy for them, that they can give an account with joy. But ultimately, as a leader, you will give an account for those you lead. It's on you. It's on you. And as a leader, it is very, very important for me to look at that. Because when things go wrong, it's very easy to point a finger and say, well, if they would change, if my children wouldn't be children, and or all these things, it would be so much easier. But it is my responsibility to have to take ownership of that and own that responsibility. My family is where we are because of the decisions or the lack thereof that I have made. Theodore Roosevelt said, if you could kick the person in the pants most responsible for most of your trouble, you wouldn't sit for a month. I thought that was a very Teddy way of bluntly saying the truth. Leadership is stepping to the front to provide that direction, to provide the way forward in the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's your job, or it's my job. The third thing I want to think about leadership that I'm also learning is leadership is sacrificial. I want to turn to John chapter 10 and read verses 7 through 15. I want to look at Jesus here, and Jesus is the ultimate example of leadership. And the sacrifice that is required. This is Jesus talking about being the good shepherd. I'm going to start in verse 7. Then Jesus said to them again, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find a pasture. The thief comes not except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they might have life, and they might have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. And as the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus is our example in this responsibility of leadership and the sacrifice that it requires. Jesus here says, I am the door. Nothing goes in and out except by me. And he says, I have come that they, his sheep, the responsibility, may have life. And not only just life, but they might have it more abundantly. He says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. This is a direct contrast to, I'm going to say, 99% of the leadership we see today. I don't care if we look at the political world, the business world, even, and this comes very, very close home. Leadership is so much of for the leader. You have CEOs of companies that live an extreme lifestyle. They have 27 personal jets instead of one. One would be nice. And they earn millions of dollars at the expense of the company. And they're a great leader because their company is doing well. But their leadership is self-driven. It is to promote themselves. Politicians are they're called public servants, and unfortunately they often don't live up to that name. It's very curious, the things politicians say, and the policies they push, and the manipulation they do in changing lanes in order to get elected. And in the instances, it's like you're looking out for yourself. You're not really being a public servant. The position is is what is driving your decisions. True leadership is not using my position to elevate myself, feed my ego, but rather it's laying down my life to give those that I have been entrusted with the resources they need to reach my goal. That's leadership. And that's why when Paul says, he who desires to be a leader desires a good thing. And we're like, whoa, don't be power hungry. But it actually is, that's not what the leadership Paul's talking about. He is saying, if you desire to give up your life and to lay down your life for someone else, you desire a good thing. Leadership is selflessness. I think a good test of leadership is how much it costs. If my position as a dad requires me to lay down my reputation, squash my ego, and crucify self, chances are I'm leading well. As a leader of my home, it is my responsibility as the leader to create an environment where my family can thrive spiritually, physically, and emotionally. I've been thinking a lot about this word thrive. It's something I desire with all my heart. It's such a great word. It has the idea of to grow vigorously. And if we look around the last couple weeks, it's pretty obvious what not thriving is. A definition of thriving that I really like was this: to progress towards or realize a goal despite or because of the circumstances. Thriving as a family doesn't mean that we don't have anything wrong, that we have more than we need and everyone's healthy, wealthy, and wise, but it's that we are in a place that in spite of the conditions, in spite of the hardships that life may bring, and things like that, that we have what we need to thrive, to grow, to reach the goal of being like Jesus. The next area, or the next question I want to look at is, what are my priorities as a father? I feel like I have 4 major areas of responsibility. And you may have more. I like to keep it pretty simple. That helps with overwhelm. I don't know if this one's going to work or not. I'll try this. So, I have myself. I have family. I have work. And I have, I wasn't quite sure how to categorize all this. So I'm just going to do this. I have church, ministry, and relationships. These are all areas I have responsibility in. And I'd be curious if I ask you which one of these is most important. This is a question I ask myself all the time. All right? Here's a test. Because we all, each one of us here, each one of those fathers, has assigned a level of importance to each one of these. And you may have more. These are all good. These are myself. That looks a little scary there to say myself. But this is all pure and holy. This is your spiritual life. This is taking care of my life. This is not golfing and hunting and fishing and things like that. All right. So that's what we're dealing with here. Work, obviously, family. This one here, I lumped a bunch of stuff together. I wasn't sure how to split them all out for the sake of time and things like that. But each one of us has assigned a level of importance here. And here's a test. I want you to think of 3 words. I want you to think of thriving, surviving, or dying. Each one of these areas, I want you to look at, think about it. If it was a plant, what's it doing? Is it thriving, surviving, or dying? The areas in my life that are thriving have the greatest priority and importance to me. I have a limited supply of resources. I'm going to try to, I have a limited supply of time and resources to pour into each one of these. And I'm going to try to illustrate this a little bit. This is my resources, this bottle of water, okay? I also have an ice cube tray. I'm a steward of my time and of my resources. It is God-given, and it's my responsibility to measure it out. I decide how they're spent, how my time and resources are spent. It's really important to look at this in my mind. I've decided these are all important. They're all necessary in my life. In fact, they all need to thrive. Okay? Is it possible? I thought about asking everyone, like, if there's anyone here that is thriving in all 4 areas of this, if you would raise your hand. And then I would ask you to come up and speak. This has frustrated me. And this has been my strategy for the past 9 years, 6 months, 27 days. Now, I have these areas, and I divvy out my resources. And I try to basically put a little bit in each one. That's the technique, all right? This is, in my experience, I never have enough. I never have enough time. I never have enough resources. And it is so frustrating. Because I'm supposed to be thriving. I'm supposed to be thriving in all these areas. And sometimes I'm either surviving or dying in all of them. There are several things that contribute to this. Part of it is some of these areas give me more affirmation and fulfillment than others. Some of them have a much more predictable and noticeable or measurable success. Okay? Work is this has been a really, really big one to me, all right? I like to work. Let me say I love to work. I like to work. In fact, it is easy for me to pour my time and my resources into that. It's logical. The more I pour in, the more I get done, the more I get paid. I mean, that's pretty simple. And so it's something that I enjoy. It gives me fulfillment. It can be something to build my ego and make me feel like I'm I'm somebody. And so there are times that I have overpoured my resources into that area of my life. And there's been some other areas that have suffered because of my over-commitment to that area. When I realized that, I said, okay, let's redo this a little bit. Let's try to even the playing field a little bit. Let's take some from here. Let's put some here. But I still have found that I run out. Because whether it's work, whether it's family, whether it's church, ministry, the relationships that encompass all this, even myself, the options are almost endless of good, godly things that you can do. So my strategy has been, let's figure out how to get more in the bottle. All right? I'm a fixer. I always have an idea, and If something isn't working, there's got to be a way to fix it. And this plays right into that. So I'm like, okay, be more efficient. Better, handle my time better. Get up earlier. Work longer. Hustle more. Be faster. And maybe I can fill my bottle enough that finally I can keep them all full. That hasn't worked either. Because you can only work so much and be so efficient, and you can do everything perfectly right, and the amount that you add to your bottle is very, very small. You can move the needle a little bit, but it's actually very small. So, what's the solution now? It is what it is. That's the battle of life. It might be. But I'm changing my strategy. And I'm speaking, I can't speak from experience and say, I know this is right. But I'm going to share it with you. I want you to see what you think. And I will tell you in 10 years if I was correct or not. I think it's a sound strategy. In fact, I think it's even biblical. And the strategy is this. It's very simple. It's doing first things first. I'm going to suggest that each one of these is of equal importance. Don't settle too hard on that. But they cannot all be first. As a father, I am required to work to provide for my family. I am required to work on my spiritual life with God. I'm supposed to take care of my family and provide for them. I'm supposed to be involved in church and be a part of a brotherhood. I'm supposed to be reaching out to the lost. I'm supposed to be maintaining my relationships and loving my brother and working that out practically in my life. Those are all very important things, and I cannot get away from any of them. But I think that there is a method and an order to this in order to thrive in all areas of life. This is the rationale. Actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself. The first thing I'm going to suggest, my first thing first, is my relationship with God. This is the rationale. I cannot lead other people unless I first lead myself. When you're on an airplane and they do that little talk at the beginning, put on your seatbelts, exits, there's two here, two here. This is how you put on a life vest. If we lose cabin pressure, a mask is going to drop from the ceiling. And what do they always tell you? They always say, you put your mask on first. And then you help the person beside you. That feels rather selfish. But I'm of little good dead. We're empty. We can't do anything. We cannot help each other if we do not first take responsibility. I should say, I take responsibility for myself. And the first thing, of the most important thing in my life, is that I know God. And I'm going to let you decide exactly what that all looks like. To me, it's shifted. It doesn't mean that I come home from work and say, all right, Amy, God's most important. I'm going to go and sit in my office for an hour. You take care of the children, I'll be up for supper. That doesn't seem right. But I think it's rather this relationship with God is something I do by myself, and probably is either when everyone else is asleep or before they're awake. That I take the first thing I do, my first responsibility before I pour anything into work, before I pour anything into family, before I pour anything into any of these, that I first pour myself into my relationship with God. And if you look at Jesus and his time in the Gospels, there's many times that it says that Jesus went out into the mountains to pray. And I'm not going to take the time. I'm going to run out of time here to read all these scriptures. But if you look at it, many times when Jesus was either faced with a multitude, he often, either before or after, went out to pray. In fact, in Mark, it says, this is the beginning of his ministry, he says he healed some people and the whole city was gathered together to heal them. And it says the next morning, now in the morning, having risen long before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and when they found him, they say, "Everyone's looking for you." Jesus met with his Father before he met with people. And I think that is the first key in thriving. And keeping first thing first is we must first meet with God. We need to be filled, so then we can fill. And I want to demonstrate this a little bit and try to help to see this. I think the strategy is, instead of pouring into each one, that as we do first things first, and as we pour, it overflows into the next, into the next, into the next, and on it goes. When I do first things first, I am then able to serve from a position of abundance versus scarcity. And if there's one thing I want to figure out before the end of my life is, I want to approach life with a tank full. Because I am great at running on empty, unfortunately. But it is so, so costly. The second first, I'm going to say, is my family. I'm speaking to fathers, or to myself as a father. And I am the one responsible for my family. And so the next most important thing for me to do after I meet with God and I'm filled here is to then, out of that abundance of myself, is pour that into my family and to provide for them. It also is very interesting to me that Jesus, in his ministry with his disciples, he often pulled his disciples aside. There are times, like, it's interesting, in Matthew chapter 5, when he teaches the Sermon on the Mount, it says there at the beginning that when Jesus saw the multitudes, he went up into the mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth, and he taught them, saying. There's other times that when the multitude was gathered, Jesus sent his disciples away, and he got them away, and he explained parables to them, and he taught them. I also believe that Jesus' responsibility was to his disciples first, before the multitudes that came. And that strategy worked extremely successfully, because he left. He was gone. But he left behind 12 people that were full. And those 12 people went out and they changed the world, because they were full. And so while family is one thing that sometimes is a little mundane to pour yourself into, and it almost seems a little selfish, and just like, it's difficult. It's hard to move the needle. It's the long game. It might take 18, 30 years before you actually see that abundance pouring out. But I think we can see it even now. I think I can see it. What if I put my relationship with God first, and I'm filled up, and out of an abundance I pour into my family, and they, as we as a family then thrive and are filled up, and then we go out into the world outside our family, whatever that is, whether it's church, whether it's ministry, whether it's our relationships, if we come full and thriving, I believe our impact is going to be exponentially greater. It is actually, I do believe it is impossible to add to the water bottle, to add to the resources. But I also believe that it is possible to multiply it. And that multiplication comes when we follow the way that God has laid out for us. Because if there's one thing I had to learn in my previous employment, I had some very, very, very big projects that were impossible for me to do myself. And something I had to learn, and it was tough. And I don't know if I've completely got it down, that if for me to be successful with my job, I had to equip other people to do the work. I had to sacrifice my ability to get a lot done and instead do the boring things that were not very noticeable at the end of the day in order to have my 5 guys equipped to do the work. And that's some of our job as a father. It's a responsibility that I accept. And my responsibility is to fill them so they in turn can fill. I'm going to have to condense this a little bit. I'm going to stop there. I've spoken to myself, I've spoken to family, and I think I've communicated the progression here, and that's the main thing I'm thinking about is this first thing first, and this serving out of abundance and pouring out of abundance into the next tier and on. Because and if we skip that, like that's when stuff suffers, and that's when stuff begins to die. I'm going to speak very briefly on my last question, and that is, how do I train my children? The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. What does that mean? What does that look like? In Proverbs there, like it's 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Verse 7 says, 5 days a week shalt thou read 2 chapters from the Bible. Thou shalt sing from hymns of the church, and thou shalt... No, it doesn't really say that. Unfortunately, sometimes I wish it did. I actually have gotten frustrated at times that when it speaks to fathers, it's never verses in sequence. It's always just one. He's like, provoke not your children to wrath, bringing them up in the fear and in the admonition of the Lord. All right, let's have some let's have some explanation there. We also live in a time when there's a lot of voices of telling you how to parent. It's also in a time where we have looked deeply into, society has looked in deeply into parenting and the styles and the effects that it has on children and things like that. And I'll be honest with you, at times, that gets very, very heavy. And I'm like, what do I do? One person says, oh, if you do that, You'll give your child so much trauma, they'll never be the same the rest of their life. That's very possible. So what do I do? How do I not damage my children? If I do nothing, I for sure will. So how do I train my children? And I've come to the conclusion that the best possible thing I can do for my children is follow God with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my strength. Because it is in what we do that they learn much more than what we say. In fact, if it's the other way around, you will convince them that you're wrong. And so the best thing I can do is that my children can look and they say, you know what? My dad loved God with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his strength. And because of that, he loved me unconditionally. He was patient, he was gentle, he was kind. He was self-controlled. And if Jesus can do that for my dad, he can do it for me. And so the challenge I want to leave with you today, as fathers and as parents, when you don't know what to do, and you are in those places that you're like, where do I go next? Follow God with all your heart and with all your soul, and let that permeate every area of your life. And I believe that you will have fulfilled your responsibility to teach and to train your children. Is there any thoughts before we close?